Imagine yourself under a starry sky, around the warm glow of a sacred fire, where speakers gather to share their wisdom and insights. Creating a sacred space where all are welcome to warm their hands, here are your hosts, Sarenth Odinson, Snow, Cabra, and Emily Streaking Fate. Discuss spirituality, mythology, animism, and culture around a virtual sacred fire. Won't you join us around Grandfather Fire?
Hail to the gods and goddesses, hail to our blessed dead, hail to our spirits, hail to those who mind the crossroads, hail to those who let us choose, hail to those who give us guidance, hail to those who show us how to say no, hail to those who show us how to stand in our power, hail to those who give us strength. We thank you. Be with us always. Vestuha.
Welcome, welcome, welcome to another episode of Around Grandfather Fire. This is episode 124 with my good friends and co-hosts, Snow and Emily Streaking Fate. Unfortunately, Casper was not able to join us tonight, so it is just the three of us tonight. How are you both doing?
I am well. I've been catching up on sleep, but I am well. Not a lot to report other than that, really. Just keeping on, keeping on.
That's good. That is enough. Nothing wrong with catching up on sleep. God knows I've been doing it lately too.
I am also well. Also, a bit short on the sleep. There have been some unexpected workings going on this week. Excited, happy, but very, very tired.
So before we get too far underway with the topic tonight, are there any projects or anything that you're working on, anything that have been uh, in the works since we last spoke? Now, for those who are listening to this uh, after the fact, this is about a week in between the broadcast, just so folks have like an awareness going forward of like how far away sometimes our recordings go between when we record this and when you get the content. So sometimes it's like, oh, well, we're just trucking along on this project, that project.
Yeah, I think the only thing that's kind of appeared in the last week since we did the last episode is sort of being asked about how I connect deities and planets and things with my astrology and my polytheism.
Ooh.
Um, it's kind of the only thing that's kind of recently arisen. So I'm kind of contemplating that and how much I really have to say about that, because that could either be really, really massive and like a whole run of blog posts, or it could be like two sentences in a message to reply to someone on Discord. So I'm figuring that one out currently.
That I understand. It's
Yeah.
it's sometimes it's not even a question of how deep you can sink your teeth into it. It's I find for questions like that, although I don't do astrology, when it comes to the questions that have that kind of depth, sometimes it's like, do I have the wherewithal to go that deep? Is it that
Mm.
deep for me? You know, there was a point in time where I was interested in like astrological bodies and their connections with different myths, like Our Vandil's Toe and Frigg's Wayne and things like that. And while that's still an interest of mine because it's heathen, it's since tapered off because of, well, other stuff becoming front and center in my practice. So I guess my question is like, is this a thing that is just so much a part of how you interface with it, or is it like something you're having to really think about?
Yeah. I mean, it's like Because the question arose in the context of kind of Gothic heathenry, but approaching polytheism, and because all the planets are typically connected to Greek and Hellenic deities, and sort of, you know, so I was saying, well, there's sort of the interpretatio Gothica angle where I can connect them to the sort of Gothic gods that we have, or that we've reconstructed or had revealed to us. Or I can just take a decidedly sort of more quote unquote pure Hellenistic approach, and it's something I'm navigating. So that's currently what I'm doing. What about you, Emily?
The people in Pack Tradition have been a bit more active this week, and so I've been doing more things with them and conversing and such, which has been nice. Stuff at the household, I think, has been a little crazier, with just the sickness that went through and Saren's work schedule and all of that. So trying to find time to tend to stuff around the home has been a little bit more of a focus this week for me as well. We're celebrating some ritual stuff with friends this weekend, and so I'm really looking forward to that. And hopefully a good release. I've had a lot of primal stuff come forward, I think, in connection with my Berserker and Elfhafnen work. And so I'm very much looking forward to just celebrating with friends.
Nice. Yeah, I keep hearing Lupercalia get mentioned. So how's that going?
Well, that was part of the errands we ran this morning before we got ourselves round, which was, as I mentioned in the pre-show, kind of like robbing Peter to pay Paul. But I was awake enough to go shop for good quality butters and bread with Emily, and it was kind of nice because it's that early morning when you're hitting a department store, and it is like damn near dead inside, and the only thing like chilling in there are stock crew and the occasional older person. It's when I prefer to shop. It's part of why I really miss the all night hours of my local department store, because Meyer is really nice for 2, 3 in the morning. I can just walk through, get my stuff, get in, get out, and get on with life. And I can't do that anymore, and it bugs the shit out of me because it was such a part of my routine. And now you just can't do it because they're only open till like midnight. Um, I find myself missing that, but it also those were times when I would find my light on, proverbially speaking, and I would get these random encounters with people at like 2 in the morning as I'm trying to grab a carton of half and half or a gallon of milk, and this person wants to divulge their life story. So, um, I guess it's just it's one of those things where you get so used to something that you don't really notice it till its absence is made plainly clear. And then, you hit something where it's like, okay, well, we're gonna go do this thing, and oh, this is what it's like to like walk around during the dead time.
As a
Um,
wise philosopher once said, you don't know what you've got till it's gone.
yeah, very true. Um, so that's what today was all about, was just going and getting things for Lupercalia together. So like a loaf of sourdough, a loaf of pumpernickel, a loaf of something else. I think it was multigrain sourdough. Um, and some Danish butter with salt and some, oh God, it was a mixed butter. I can't recall, Parmesan, garlic, herb, or something like that. So I'm really looking forward to this. Um, Aside from that, I've been working on getting myself ready for convocation, which is in a week, and I am very excited about that. It's going to be at Ypsilanti this year, which is where we live. So I'm so happy not having to take a 45-minute drive, 30-40 minute drive anyway, to get to it to start with. And then the hotel that we're going to be staying in and doing this at is about, I'd say, a good whole other convention on top of it in terms of size, and the place is completely sold out and only available to us, which is nice. So that's, one of the big things I look to every year, really. So I'm going to be doing 4 workshops for that, one of which is going to be with Emily, and I'm really looking forward to the sharing spirit workshop we've got planned. That's mostly what's been on my docket, is just prepping and getting stuff together.
That's really cool. Do we get sneak previews of what the other 3 workshops are?
So, yes. I'm actually going to pull up the convocation schedule here in a hot second.
Because I know over here, the people in us through UK are currently sorting out their Jorvik meetup. So it seems like a time for conventions and things.
So 10:30 on Thursday, I'm going to be doing the Digging in the Dvergar dialogue with dwarves. For those of you who were at Trothmoot, you know what this one is. This is that same workshop. It's just a little bit different because the name size requirements were different, because I could actually do the full alliteration. But yeah, Digging the Dvergar is at 10:30 Thursday. All of these are EST. And then Friday is Meet the Runes at 4 p.m. And that is a teenager workshop. I'm actually really looking forward to that, because I was tagged with the staff who asked me to do specifically some teenage workshops, some teen oriented workshops. So I've got Meet the Runes on Friday at 4, and then Saturday at 4 I've got Meet the Heathen Gods. And then Sunday at noon is when Emily and I is sharing spirit work is. So I'm really looking forward to all of this, and it's kind of nice because they're not all piled on top of each other on one particular day. So I can actually like spread some of that energy out over the weekend.
Nice. That sounds like it'll be good.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to it, and so that's my main thing. Of course, working on this show, working on the podcast, Three Pagans on Tap.
Writing too many books.
I mean,
working too many hours.
Well, yeah,
missing too many sleeps.
At this point, unfortunately, because of how they've staffed us, the overtime is just baked into the cake. So the sleep thing, unfortunately, suffers as a result. I am just really grateful that my father was cool with getting baby girl off the bus, knowing that we had a broadcast today. So it was really, really nice of him to do that for us, so we wouldn't have to get her off the bus and worry about that.
The joys of reliable community.
Oh my gods. There are some days where it's just like, I have no idea how the hell I would function without it. I don't know.
Because independence is a myth.
Oh my God, it is such a myth. I would not be able to function without the people in my life. I mean, this show is just one example. Go ahead, Emily. I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to agree. Autonomy is wonderful, but independence is definitely a myth. Like, it's all about working together. And I wouldn't want to see you without having the support of your parents with everything, because they add such a significant layer, especially with the kids.
Yeah, I mean, aside from being just fabulous grandparents that just love their grandchildren, there's been so many times where I'm like, I cannot handle this child. I don't know what to do with her or with him. There's been plenty of times over the course of our son's life when I'm like, nope, I have no idea what to do with this one. Maybe you do.
To be fair, your daughter is a mini you, so your parents have oodles of experience in that area already built up.
To a
He was
frightening
also
degree.
bald and bearded.
Honestly, yeah, I wouldn't be shocked if she pulled the female D&D dwarf thing. It would not shock me in the least.
Yeah, I wouldn't put it past her. She likes to dress up as a dragon and as a bat. So adding a beard would not be a big thing.
She comes by it honestly.
But it just speaks to some of our usual refrains about how it is good to have people who specialize and have experience in different areas, and how relationships and support networks and community helps. And whether that's religious communities or whether that's simple domestic, sort of domestic labor and familial stuff.
Yeah, I would not be able to live where I live without knowing my neighbors. Just because we've had so much stuff that has happened over the course of the years, that having a poor relationship with my neighbors throughout some of these ice storms would have sucked. Just because, you've got random crap from other people's houses coming in your yard, and all the challenges that just come with home ownership. And it's so gratifying to not only know my neighbors' names, but like if something goes down, we will have each other's backs, even though we don't see much of each other because we're on completely opposite schedules. I seriously have to hand it to our neighbors. Like, we might be ships passing in the night, but we're ships moored in the same harbor. So we will, if we see the ship start to drift a bit, we know that either one of us can cast on and bring us closer to the docks and make sure we're all safe together. And I cannot tell you what peace of mind that is, knowing that I can look at both of my neighbors and go, you know what, I trust that you're not going to mess with me, and that if the chips were down, I could send my kids to you, and vice versa. There is no treasure you could hand me that affords that kind of peace of mind.
I mean, the other thing is it speaks to both being able to offer help, but also being able to accept help, neither of which are particularly easy.
No. No. It's really not. And we got a face full of this with I think we mentioned this some time ago, where our neighbor's dog had been hit by a car and we stepped in to help. And I didn't mention it at the time, but I had a raging flu. And it was like, well, this is definitely where I looked at myself in the mirror, looked at Emily, and went, well, this is kind of where the rubber meets the road. Like, I could say, oh, I don't have the spoons for this, or I could dig in and help them in their crisis. So it brought us so much closer together to dig deep. And I don't recommend that for every scenario, for God's sakes. But in this particular instance, when our neighbor found out, he was like floored. And it really brought us together as households. And sometimes you just got to make that sacrifice so that your neighbor is okay. And I don't know, it was just, it's one thing to say I've got these values, it's a whole other thing to really live them. When you're sick and your neighbor is in crisis and they're not sure what to do, and you're the point man, and you're like, all right, well, we'll handle this, we'll figure it out, let's go. And some of that is just, I'm useful in a crisis. Some of that is the ADHD kind of locks you in because, oh, there's something to focus on here. Whoop. I don't know. It's you, because of how splintered we are in this culture and this society. We don't give ourselves many opportunities to be there for our neighbors either, because we're so atomized, and because some of the knowledge to help our neighbors is so niche or just out of my experience. It's like, I don't know how to help you, but here I am. So sometimes it's just your experiences kind of layer up and you're present where you're needed. And sometimes it's when your dog's sick and this poor person is distraught and needing somebody to help out with something that suddenly happened and it's a tragedy and I don't know what to do. Okay, well, clearly you cannot lift this. I got it. Sometimes all you gotta do is have enough muscle to lift something. No special knowledge required.
So on the topic of sort of, I mean, we touched on a lot there, but sort of talking about networks, support, relationships, limits, boundaries, digging in, enduring. Did we want to segue into the main topic today? I don't know,
Yeah.
Emily, if you wanted to go for it.
Sure. Talking about establishing boundaries with our spirits. I come from a Catholic background, and although my parents were very big on like discussing boundaries with humans, there was still that overlying, idea in that if God asks you to jump, you say how high. Now, if it comes through a human, you examine that a little bit more closely, but it's still the idea of always say yes, because the divine is omnipotent and omniscient and always has your best sense at heart. Now, as a polytheist and also somebody with an active ancestor practice, I have over time realized the importance of being able to say no. I think some deities will keep pushing until you say no as a way to help you establish your boundaries and establish that strength and that trust in yourself. Some ancestors will keep pushing just because somebody is dead doesn't mean they are all knowing. And I love my ancestors very dearly, but they definitely have different ideas of what is best for me and how I should go about things. And it took me quite a while to realize that just because they are my elders and family doesn't mean that they're always right, and it doesn't mean that they have the last say. I've made some significant decisions based off trying to do what I felt my ancestors wanted me to do, which was maybe not what was best for me, or it was definitely not what was best for me, or not what I wanted. And I didn't quite have the words for it at the time, but it was a learning and growing experience. And hopefully this episode will help people learn a little bit more quickly so they won't have to go through some of the more difficult things of finding yourself in a space where you very much don't want to be, simply because you were trying to do what your gods and your ancestors wanted. Now, with some of my deities, I have a deep relationship of trust that has been built over the years. And so when things come through from them, I use discernment to make sure it is from them. But I have a much deeper trust that they have my best interests at heart. With other gods that I worship and work with, it is a little bit more push and pull. It depends on the relationship, it depends on the personality, and it depends on the situation. But it took me a really long time, and I think I made a lot of agreements with a lot of gods initially when I first came into polytheism, because I was under the impression that the spirits come first, which is still how it works in my universe. But that they always know best as regards to me. And I realized that there's a lot of different ways to do things, and just because they want something done a certain way doesn't mean that that will be the best or the easiest or the most satisfactory way for me to do it. So y'all can jump in with your thoughts.
Well, I've got more than a few. I think that it's important that you touched on, like, there's different levels of relationship and different pushes and pulls. And as a result, there's different sources for responsibility and obligation. I think that is perhaps an underutilized part of the conversation in polytheist circles as to why this god or this goddess or this ancestor or this group of spirits has such a pull sometimes, is how tightly or how loosely our various threads are woven or how deep we're carved. I know that for myself, Othin is first among my gods pretty much always. And that really kind of sets the tone for how other Genregen come into the spaces that I work or that I worship. Because if it tries to take the place of the obligations, responsibilities, and the things that I already have going on with Othin, it's probably not going to happen. So much of my life is oriented around that already, that I sometimes I forget to like communicate that with other people because it is such a part of how I live my life. So when you proposed the no episode, it was like, oh, this is a good one because I was part of a real big push of, the gods should have more say in your life back in the 2010s blogosphere. And I do still feel like, depending on what you're doing and how you're doing it, that's still a valid point. Although I don't think it's as universal as my fellows who were blogging at the time put it out to be. So I guess, yeah, I guess I'm just really kind of vibing with that whole responsibility and obligation bit for it. And that's been kind of like two of my watchwords, like what's the responsibility and obligation I hold, and then orient the life around that. Like it forms so much a core of how I approach everything. And the willingness to say no becomes easier the further away from those responsibilities and obligations it is.
I think that's why it is important when you are developing relationships, whether it's with a god or with ancestors or other spirits, that it is a process. And so there is that building of trust, but also time to see if your goals are in alignment, if what that particular god or spirit wants from you is something which you are able to give in a way that that you want to. I think that not obviously everything that your gods ask from you is going to be easy or necessarily something that you want to do. But it is an ongoing give and take process. If everything that your gods and spirits ask from you is painful and disheartening, and you are not getting any joy from the connection, then why are you investing in that connection? What are you getting out of it instead? and there might be something else that you are, but not that, like, and I know I'm saying getting out of it like a back and forth, but for relationships to be sustained, there has to be a flow back and forth. It can't be one person does everything and the other person doesn't do anything. And even if one person gives something to the other person, it has to be something that the other person wants or needs or values. Otherwise, the relationship between those people will just fall apart. So developing relationships with deities and other spirits before oathing yourself or taking certain vows, or just blindly following them, I think it's an important process to make sure that you have a trust in what this God is hoping to help you become, for lack of better wording, or ancestors. Like ancestors, it gets, I don't know if it gets more down and dirty sometimes, but it definitely took me a while to realize, yes, they are my elders. Yes, they are family, but just like family, they don't always know or understand all of the options. They might still have the same goals, and they might not even realize that goals that you have that will benefit them. And my family living is very loud. My family dead is no different. And I really enjoy having them around, but I have learned that I also need to take time out sometimes and be like, all right, you go over there. You, like, I'm mad at you. You crossed a boundary, or I do not want to discuss this right now. I have final say. You have input. I have final say. And unless you take oaths or vows that change that for certain spirits, you always have final say. And even if you do take oaths or vows, there's always not always, but there's often the option to you can try to renegotiate. I also think that if you do take an oath or a vow, putting in a back door of, in case, if for some reason renegotiation is needed, that is a possibility. But that's a different episode maybe. But I just remember coming into polytheism and trying to say a lot of yeses to a lot of different spirits, and my hearing was maybe not on par with my asking. And so I think I made a lot more commitments initially than I realized. And so then it was a process over years of renegotiating and also realizing how I could fulfill different commitments and build on relationships and seeing where the best fit for me was. Because when I left Christianity, there were a lot of different reasons that I left. But because I left, I had the opportunity to choose my religion. And so in choosing the gods and the spirits that I want to honor and worship, I wanted to choose gods and spirits that were aligned with who I was, how I wanted to go about my life, and the kind of things I wanted to create. Snow, what do you have? Did you have any thoughts on the matter?
I mean, a lot's been said. I definitely think ancestors are decidedly more variable than spirits. I mean, I would say I've had interactions with familial ancestors that have been extremely warm and rewarding and sort of emotionally nourishing. But then I've also had ones where household spirits and even the cat were trying to intervene and stop things because things were just not good, and had they proceeded would have been even worse. Because I mean, yeah, like you were saying, sort of dead humans are dead humans, and various parts of the being may go to various places, but the parts that are lingering here are lingering here for a reason. And that could be for anything from staying to watch over and give guidance and support, through to sort of staying because they're unsatisfied or some kind of revenge motive. Or I mean, we have myths and folklore the world over of all these kinds of different reasons as to why the dead or parts of the dead stay in this realm beyond sort of physical decomposition.
You mean that death doesn't instantly enlighten you? Oh, that's bullshit.
It does if you pay enough.
Right?
And I would say similarly with different kinds of spirits and sort of other beings, where I mean, I suppose a lot of this depends on the kind of philosophy you're approaching this with. I suppose being someone who's coming in with more of a sort of ancient classical philosophy and sort of an ancient Egyptian philosophical kind of view, and ancient Greek, there's kind of this whole idea of the spirits that are closer to the gods are more inclined to be more caring and guiding and so on. And then sort of, I don't know if I want to use the word hierarchy, but that's perhaps the simplest way of continuing the flow here. The spirits sort of further down that are perhaps more morally ambiguous and perhaps act more independently. And so that's where you get spirits sort of asking for morally questionable things, ethically questionable things, perhaps legally questionable things, depending on the situation. And yeah, I would definitely say that if you were being asked something that was morally, ethically, legally, socially questionable, then to seriously consider it and to draw that line in the sand and stand up and bow out of the relationship or say no, or perhaps there is some sense of a test there or something.
I think
I
so
think
much. Oh, go ahead, please.
no, I was just gonna say, I think sometimes even if it is not like, even if it's like a morally neutral thing, um, sometimes it is still an action that's not congruous with the direction that you want to take. I'm kind of like, there are multiple different pathways up the mountain, and I think some pathways might work better with certain gods while other pathways work better with other gods, and it might not be an issue with you or with that specific deity or spirit. It just might not be the, like, neither of you are necessarily wrong. It's just there's a better fit for you elsewhere. So I think it is important to remember that just because you can, just because you are able to do something, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to do it. Again, that's when you take into account the relationship that you have with that spirit, the relationship that you want to create with that spirit, and the direction that you want to be moving in. Go ahead, Sarenth.
Shit. Oh, I lost my train. I think
I
it
was
had.
just
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
No, it's all right if you've recovered the train. by all means, continue down the track.
I have not. The train has left the station and the train tracks.
Okay, I was just gonna say, whilst you were trying to figure out how much coal the engine needed, that Emily had given life advice teenagers the world over ignore, which is just because you can doesn't mean you should.
I mean, to be fair, I think everybody ignores that piece of advice at some point in their lives to their detriment.
This is true.
Somebody has shouted at me for Sarenth no, and I've taken that as a challenge to scream Sarenth yes. So, I think so much of this really depends on your personal philosophy, of course, but it also depends on the particular arrangements that you've got. So I think to people that I follow on like TikTok, like Mudang Jen, or I think of Reverend Olivia from our Shinto episode, where you've got people in these dedicated, very public facing spiritual jobs where there is a thing that they are required to do as part of that job, and it's no bullshit, you must do this thing or you're not in alignment. And I think to a certain degree, even within that, there's still within these very decided culture norms, there's still ways to say no. So anybody that like is coming to you and going, well, you just can't say no, I'm sorry, but I have not seen evidence that no's are not allowed in animism and polytheism. Depending on the relationship you've got, it might be harder to say no, or it might cost you more, depending on what your role is or what the requirements of you are. But I don't believe that the ability to say no leaves entirely, and I would seriously put under suspicion anybody that does tell you that.
I would also say that yes and no are not always the only answers. It's important to consider the consequences of both and whether you're willing to go forward with either the consequences of saying yes or the consequences of saying no.
Mm-hmm.
But negotiation is also sometimes an option, and you don't know unless you ask.
Mm-hmm.
It might be, no, I don't want to do it this way, but I want to approach the same goal from this other way. Are you okay with that?
Right.
Or no, I can't do this right now, but if you help me get the resources, I can do it later down the line, such as more time or more support with other things. It is not a binary answer. And I think we sometimes forget that, if I can't, like, it's either a yes or a no. A yes with caveats is also, yes, I will do this, but I need this in return to help make this a successful venture. But yeah, I think those are nuances that are often kind of pushed to the side in the community, especially, and this might not be the same now, but I remember when I came in, I saw things as very black and white. And again, some of that was coming from my Catholic background. Yes was good. We always say yes to the spirits. No is not an option, and those were like the only two things. But I think the nuances of yes or no with caveats, the nuances of negotiation are all options that we should maybe be a little bit louder about in our community and letting people know as they are progressing down their paths.
One thing I'm reminded of is I forget the name of the original author, but it was something that Dr. Angela Puka referenced in one of her episodes, which was the notion that monotheism has one truth And so then you inherently create this binary polarity where you just have the two poles, the two extremes, and it's, you know, it's on or off. It's like a digital system. And polytheism doesn't work like that at all because of the inherent plurality and multiplicity. And then just thinking about something I thought of while Sarenth was talking there was that I think in an healthy, fair, polytheistic community, you won't find anyone saying, well, you can't say no. But what you might encounter is someone saying, well, why would you say no? And I think the implications of that are very different. You might still bristle at it because, especially if you're coming from a particularly traumatic Christian background, that's still unsettling to hear, maybe. But I think asking, why would you say no, is still coming from a much healthier and positive place than just being outright told you can't say no.
Yeah. Something, and I'm going to torture the living shit out of this metaphor because it's useful to the conversation, I think.
Like a dead horse.
Oh man. So one of the things that I hear a lot and that you used as an example, Emily, was there's more than one way up the mountain. Well, not all of us are walking up the mountain. Some of us are much happier to walk around the fucking woods. And there's the I'm trying not to lose my thought because of your goofy ass comment. So yes, dead horses with live feces, yes. So the part of the issue with like using like only one metaphor, we're all going up the same mountain, except we're not. That motherfucker over there is trying to find Mount Olympus. This motherfucker over here is trying to, scale the mountain to go talk with the Jotnar. And this person over here is trying to find, the Roman gods, and good luck to them. We are all at different places with different objectives. And I think part of the problem of binary thinking with yes, no, up, down, left, right is we are omnidirectional beings. There's, multiple axes we can go, and you can change your mind. That's the lovely thing about having a word like no at our disposal, is that what I agree to today may not be what I can or should agree to tomorrow. And this is also why I'm really like, be careful what you oath, because they just might make you pay for it. They just might take you at your word.
When I decided to accept the offer to be a god spouse, I initially set time limits on that of like, I agreed to this for a year, as kind of like on a continuing, and we will keep revisiting this for a while to make sure that this was a relationship that I could do successfully. And I think that being able to try things out, because you mentioned, Sarenth, that we do grow and change, and what we are able to do and what we want to do in the direction that we're going in sometimes shifts as we grow and as we age. And so allowing ourselves time for some of that growth in the beginning, to see if these are like the lifelong commitments that we want to make, if we happen to make lifelong commitments. You don't need to make any lifelong oaths to be a good and active pagan. A lot of people don't. I happen to have a couple big ones, and because of those, I had to do extra work to get released from my Catholic ones. And I don't think I would have had to have done that extra work to get released from my Catholic vows if I had not had these other oaths and vows. Different strokes for different folks, for lack of better wording. But for me, it's always been helpful to, with some of the bigger vows, to take it like a step by step before doing a more long-term commitment, to see if it really vibes. And for me too, to see if I'm actually able to gain that confidence in the ability to fulfill that role and fulfill those vows. But yeah, I like how you mentioned the not everybody wants to go up the mountain. There's a lot of different terrain out there to explore. And there's a lot of different ways of going about things. And so for each practitioner, it's something that they have to consider. And every decision has consequences, even if the decision is not to decide. And so I think considering those, I really like, Snow, how you talked about why would you say no? Because I think that is a very good question. And I do think a lot of extra Christians come into paganism, and there is that initial I think fear of saying yes, so to speak, fear of letting a deity or a spirit, putting your trust into a higher power and trusting that they have your best interests at heart. And so looking at that, if that is a reason for saying no for someone, looking at if you're saying no because you need more resources, whether it is time, whether it is energy, whether it is money, whichever answer you go with, whether it is yes or whether it is no.
Right.
I think it's important to look at the whys.
I mean, I'm not someone coming with Christian trauma, but I know people who are, or know people who have, and have sort of observed it and heard anecdotes and so on. And from what I gather, it kind of goes two ways. You get a lot of very defiant, rebellious, I'm going to stand up on my own. I'm not going to kneel before the gods. The gods are just like us. I'm going to say no every time, because how dare someone else try and tell me what to do? That kind of thing, which is very much rooted in anger and trauma and pain from that background. But you also see the opposite of, well, I'm going to say yes every time, because there's a lot of fear baked in there. And whichever way it goes, there's a lot of hurt and pain and trauma in both of those sort of scenarios. And so they often find it difficult to sort of pause for a moment and think about the whys and the whats and the hows, because so much of it is very it's sort of instinctive, but it's like a conditioned instinct because of what they're coming from, and whether they're running from it or lashing out at it, or sort of still carrying it unintentionally and just trying to swap out names to make it seem like something different. That really complicates this matter of developing relationships with God's ancestors and spirits, and how you navigate that, and any sense of giving or being able to receive in those relationships, and being able to work out your role or the roles of the gods and spirits and ancestors in those relationships.
I really hasten to point out that my no does not equal your no. As a spirit worker dedicated to Odin, a no to him, for me, sometimes requires more out of me to say no. and I do not mean this in terms of like I am a more important or better or more holy spirit worker or person or pagan or polytheist or whatever. I mean that in the context of my relationship, there is more drawing me to aligning with Othin's interests. And so sometimes saying yes or no is harder or more rewarding as a result, even if saying yes or no to a thing would in the long term do me better. And there have been cases where Othin has set up a kind of a no-win scenario where I had to learn a lesson about putting myself first as part of doing the work for him. But that's because I can be a bit of a hard ass and hard headed, and does not speak to either um, what people should or should not do. It's just the lessons I had to learn. Yeah, I know, I know. All of you were shocked. Sarenth, hard headed? Nah, surely not. Um, but all of this is really in context, right? I think that for me is really where the metal meets the meat of polytheism and animism, is that we are couched in these relationships, and the impact of me saying no to certain beings is a whole lot easier out of hand. Like I respect her ladyship. I don't fuck with the Morgan if I can help it. And I mean that with full due diligence, respect, and honor to her ladyship, but that's a fucking no-go relationship because I got more than enough things on my plate. Um, and I got a really good taste of what her presence was like at Cordu Cathubad was ritual at Many Gods West back in I think 12 or 13. And they're like, yeah, so if you want to dedicate yourself to the Morgan, step forward. And if you don't, step back. And I took like 3 or 4 fucking steps back just to make good and goddamn sure everybody there understood where I stood on that. Not because I was dishonoring, but because I was honoring.
You're not
But
risking being that one who's standing in line while everyone else steps back, and then it looks
oh my
like you stepped
God.
forward.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, like who wants to volunteer for this assignment? Take a step forward, every asshole steps backwards, and you're the schmuck with the mop and bucket. Nah, no thanks.
Everyone in a race backwards.
Yeah, nah, that ain't me. That ain't me. I ain't no senator's son. Um, uh, go ahead, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, like how you said you were honoring by taking that step backwards because you knew that you did not have, and like your obligations and responsibilities card was already very full. And so you honored the Morgan by not taking on more than you wanted or needed or could handle.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that that is an important thing too. Some like saying no is not necessarily a disrespectful thing. Sometimes it is the most respectful answer.
Uh, Go ahead, please. Go ahead, Snow.
I was going to say, a thought I've had throughout this whole sort of conversation overall is that for those in the pagan community or wider polytheist spaces or occult spaces or so on, who don't or have never had direct experiences with the divine or with God's ancestors or spirits, may find this whole concept very kind of baffling and strange because they've never been asked anything or never been instructed anything to their knowledge for them to be in a situation to say yes or no. And so I'm wondering if either of you have thoughts about how you would try and either explain this to them or answer that kind of question for those people. Because we have people like that in our communities.
Right.
And I know that sometimes conversations like this, while they can be rewarding for those who do have those experiences, could sometimes risk alienating those who don't.
That's a very good point. I think for me, the question of yes or no still is a valid thing, even if all you're doing is exoteric practice. So your yes or no may not be contingent on received instruction, or, hey, you've got this thing you've got to do. It might just be, do you have the energy to do ritual today? Like for me, that is still a valid question. Like I've had to, like, look, I know that I have a standing requirement to make offerings once a week. I can't do it. It doesn't make me feel good, but it's either I sleep now while the getting is good, or I stay up, make this offering, and completely bork my sleep schedule. This is a dance I've had to do a lot more recently because of the overtime schedule I'm having to keep. And it really sucks because I feel in some cases like I'm failing. And I know that I'm actually not, not only because I'm receiving reassurance from my community and the Gendregen themselves, but because if I was in this situation counseling somebody else, I would say, trying to make an offering while you're fucking sleepy is probably not the best headspace. I mean, there's times where, you know, you've got to grit your teeth and just do it. But at the points where I'm finding myself a lot when I'm collapsing in the chair when I get home after work, probably not the best mindset to have when you're trying to lay down an offering. And so I find that even for folks who aren't doing a lot of spiritual flash traffic, a lot of the yeses and the nos, what you do and don't agree to, comes down to the nuts and bolts of where this fits into your life and how. And being gracious with yourself that you're a human being living this life. And it's not that your religion doesn't matter. It's that because of the situation we all find ourselves in, having to make a living, which is kind of a gross concept on its face. It doesn't sit in my mouth very well. I don't like the feeling of saying making a living. There are just going to be times where you're going to have to look at your shrine or what have you, and just say, no, I don't have the spoons for this. And that's true whether, you know, you were ass over tea kettle in spirit work, or you don't get any flash traffic whatsoever and you're complete and total shut off to all that. There are still going to be times in your life where it's like, no, I've got to make a choice, and I have to have my mental health or my physical health come first.
I completely agree with what Saren said. When I first came into polytheism, I had it in my head that I wanted to be a Greek reconstructionist, and I tried very, very hard. And I did have a spirit come in and tell me this is not working for you, because I didn't want to see the signs myself. But even if you don't have that direct yank, looking at, is your practice feeding you? Are the things that you believe in, like, echoed in your life? Do those things fit together? And if not, does that mean you need to make a shift in your life? Or does that mean you need to make a shift in your practice, or the direction that you're going, or the spirits that you're honoring? Because even if you come in thinking, this is where I fit, but then you try it for a while and it's not helping you, or like feeding you in the way that you were hoping or the way that you need, allowing yourself to re-examine and see whether that is just taking a break because you need rest, whether that's maybe doing some exploratory into other spirits and other paths. Maybe that is, if you made a promise coming and saying, whether it was with the spirits or with yourself, I'm gonna do like this big offering once a week, and then you find that you don't have the time or the energy for it because life changes, and allowing yourself to, like, say in prayer, say to the spirits, or just say to yourself, this is not working for me right now, so we are going to shift this. And I don't think this requires hearing anything or getting any directives necessarily from the gods and the spirits themselves. But I think it is important to remember that you are allowed to shift. Just because you made a decision early on doesn't mean that you have to keep that decision forever. If things are not working, then you owe it to yourself to see how you need to shift. And I think that's where the yes no comes in.
No, I think that's a really good point. That yes, it does come down to those questions of, is this sustainable? Is this rewarding? Are you finding balance here? Are you finding benefit here? Is it more draining to do this than not to do this? Those kinds of questions. Because I think we can all kind of relate to that. Whether you do have kind of direct experiences with spirits and gods and whatnot, or not, because we're all kind of thinking about rituals and offerings and holidays and all the rest of it. And so then, yeah, the yes or no coming down to, do I have the spoons for this? Do I have the time for this? Do I want to do this right now? Would it be better if I did this next Monday or tomorrow? Or yeah, no, I think that's and being able to accept making decisions that maybe don't work in the long term and changing your mind, and that not everything needs to be etched in stone as a lifelong oath. And yeah, no, I think those are really good points.
I ran across this this thing on my Facebook page, so I'm just gonna like share it because I think this is salient to this. So I just came out to my dad about being non-binary, and he said something really wise about names, I think. He said, quote, "Gifts are not obligations. You give things to people and you hope they like them. And your name was a gift from us to you. If it doesn't work for you anymore, you're not obligated to keep it." And I just thought maybe other people could use hearing something like that, end quote. I feel very similar about our paths. I feel very similar about the relationships we keep with Gundragon. Because sunk cost fallacy is a thing. And being completely tied to the notion that I identify as, or I am this, or I should always be this, does not foster thought after a point. We can use our identifiers as thought stoppers. And this is true whether we're talking about religious identifiers, gender, sexuality, orientations of all kinds. If you stop thinking about who and what you are, because I am X, therefore I must be Y. If all you're operating on is heuristics, you may wish to think about what you're saying yes to by default and what you're rejecting out of hand by consistently embracing this. It's one thing if you're happy and this makes sense for you and all that. If you're actually like having some thought behind what you're doing while you're doing it. And no is a complete sentence, as certainly as yes could be. That being said, I think that part of negotiating with gods, ancestors, and spirits, part of figuring your own self out is being willing to probe and to just sit down and fucking think, ponder, wool spin. You don't have to have the answer at hand, but why is X or Y idea undesirable? What things does it lend you to? What are you perhaps not seeing? And I mean, nobody can do this in a vacuum very well for very long. There's a reason why ancient philosophers would fucking talk to each other, even if they vehemently disagreed with each other. And God knows that they did. Nobody really does this shit in a vacuum. even people who are like, well, I have just a personal relationship with God, they are still negotiating that relationship through the experiences of religion that they have over the course of their life. If you're talking about like uh, quote non-denominational end quote Christianity, they are negotiating oftentimes the KJV, the King James version of the Bible, which is a whole mess on its own. There's entire rants I could go on with that, but suffice to say, if you're not thinking about the resources you're using to make the yes or the no, somebody else is making those choices for you. Because if the circle of information that you have given yourself is a very teeny box, then that is the only place where those choices exist. And that might work for you. That might work for the rest of your life, but it's worth knowing. It's worth pointing out. It's worth understanding that that's a thing.
And that's also a very succinct way of tying up every thread in this conversation with the importance of community and support and independence being a myth, but also something that we often talk about with the importance of reflection and sort of thinking about what you're doing, why you're doing it, how you're doing it, when you're doing it, where you're doing it, and reflecting on things that have happened, thinking about things that you're planning, thinking about things that are happening in the moment. And so with these relationships with gods and spirits and ancestors, thinking about how you're perceiving them, thinking about how you're interpreting and understanding what you're getting from these experiences, wondering if there are other interpretations here, and then thinking about why you're drawn to a particular answer when requests are made or perhaps instructions are given or requests, those kinds of things, for the saying no to gods and kind of questioning why that might be. Not necessarily in order to change your mind, but just to better understand why that's the answer you've arrived at, or maybe why that's the answer that initially arose. And I think that can be really helpful, both long and short term. And also questioning your understanding and interpretation, not only on what you've been asked, but also on how you're perceiving the person or the being or the entity making the request or giving the instruction, which also ties into something which we often go on about with discerning who it is that's making the request or question, understanding the identity of them to check the validity of it and the legitimacy, which is something that you definitely see a lot of the more you look into esoteric, occult, and magical texts from kind of, I mean, especially once you get into the Renaissance and Agrippa and the grimoire tradition, there is a lot of, and you hold them in the circle until they can answer X, Y, Z convincingly and correctly, and then you know for certain that they are who they claim to be, and then proceed. And if not, you shall banish them. And a lot of that has kind of carried on into modern paganism. And so that testing their identities, testing the legitimacy of the claims, and then using that to gauge what you're being asked or what you're being told or advised or whatever, and then using that to sort of question your response.
Almost a scientific occultism, if you will. I kind of appreciate that. I want to bring forward something Claire mentioned in the chat. I'd also be curious on your all's thoughts on discernment in this process. E.g., did this request really come from Spirit X? Is this another way to interpret this request, etc.? I'm gonna fall back to Jim's spiritual accounting PDF because it's really fucking good. But also it kind of follows this scientific occultism thing where you're testing what the spirits say to a degree, and not just in terms of trustworthiness, but in terms of your interpretation. Um, part of the discernment process is, how do I know what I know? And who do I go to when I don't know what I know? Or when I've hit my knowledge limit, I guess. Uh, who do I turn to? What do I turn to? Is a big deal for me in the discernment process, because if I'm dealing with a spirit that I don't know or that I don't have a cultural context for, like see the Celtic gods, except for Brigid, I don't really carry relationships with them. So, and that particular relationship is filtered through a very early experience in paganism, which may not be valid to the rest of the culture group or any of the rest. So part of my perspective on this is like, when you're asking, did this request really come from a spirit X? To a certain degree, you're kind of needing to lean on people who are experts. If you are the expert, this is what community is there for. Even if you're not the expert, this is what community is there for. And that's true of any of the three legs of the particular stool that spiritual accounting rests on, and that's the lore, cumulatively, other people in the community, and divination. And honestly, like this particular way of doing things has served me exceptionally well, because you can easily turn this to evaluating the people in your circles that you're asking for help. Do they have an understanding of the background material? Do they have a relationship with this spirit, this group of spirits, this god, this goddess, this ancestor, yada yada? And do they have the ability to help you divine or intuit, or in some way, shape, or form reach a decision? So that for me, that entire process of discernment is communal in some way, shape, or form, even if it's not a community that's sitting there right with you every step of the way. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I would say for me too. It depends a little bit on the like if it's a request, then obviously it's an actionable thing. So how that actionable thing will affect me. If it is going to have a huge effect on my life, then even if I have a really good relationship or a close relationship with the spirit, I will probably try to get multiple blind divinations done from readers that I trust, either completely blind or partially, just so that I have outside input if it's something that is greatly impactful on my life. If it is something that's a lot less impactful, like a spirit that I'm already connected to that wants like a certain drink for an offering, then that is something that I'm more likely just to trust in my own feelings and responses. I know off and on the idea of God phone has been big in the community, and it is not something that I have ever like possessed. I just get, feelings sometimes, like most people. If I feel like my ancestors want some coffee, I'm gonna get them some coffee, because that's not gonna have a negative impact on my life as far as I can tell, unless I do it at night and then they keep me up all night. Um, but if a deity is asking me to make an oath for a year or 5 years or my lifetime, then you better believe I'm going to have multiple people that I trust divine on that and eke out specifics, because that will be very impactful on my life, not just for like a night.
Okay, so we've talked quite a bit about like how you make a choice and all that. What does it look like when you actually say no? Like, just like off the rip, when you say no to a god, what does that tend to look like for you? What's your experience of that?
I would say sometimes there's pushback, and I have initially said no and eventually come around and change that to a yes. Because there was enough back and forth communication that I decided that a yes was a better answer. Other times there I'm just thinking of certain ancestors pouting in the corner. Sometimes it is a no, and I need to take time away, and they need to take time away, and we need to feel our feelings and get past it and move on to the next thing. Sometimes the spirit will, it's a no that will end that connection, depending, but I always take that into account with the level of the request, and I look at what the consequences are and whether those are consequences that I'm willing to accept. And sometimes, in some cases, I am, if it is something that I don't feel I can fulfill. Other times you say no, and then like the god particularly is like cheering you on because that's what they wanted. It was I want you to stand up for yourself and take care of yourself and whatnot. And yes, I was like pushing too far. And I wanted you to be able to put up those boundaries. So not all situations are the same. But I go into that having thought through my no's and what the potential results are, so that I know going in the consequences. And sometimes if it's a bigger thing, I might ask for help in divining the consequences so that I have like other input if I'm unsure of what the consequences might be of saying no. But yeah, it depends. A lot of times I will be, depending on the no, sometimes I just get irritated or angry, and it's a no, and then I need time away. And sometimes they still poke, and sometimes I come back around, and sometimes I'm like, no, a no is a no. And if you're going to keep poking on that, we are going to have more distance.
I like the folk Catholic. I'm brought to mind a Cabra, and I'm thinking of like the folk Catholic practices of, look, if you don't do this thing, I'm gonna go bury your fucking head in the dirt. Which is, you know, a valid way of emphatically stating your no. I think that you know, depending on how much you need that no to stick, you know, it might be a thing where you need to do that with a given piece of statuary or a given piece of regalia or what have you. That, you know what, if you keep pushing this fucking thing, your statue is gonna be out in the bog. So yeah, I think how we say no and to the degree and severity that no is backed up makes a lot of difference. And I really appreciate the question, Claire, and I hope the rest of your break at work goes well. Because that was a really good series of questions you asked. And I appreciate the contribution.
And for those wondering who are listening after the fact, Claire is one of our patrons who has joined us in the live chat for the live show. And if you're interested in doing that, go to patreon.com/aroundgrandfatherfire, and you can do too.
Yes, please do. And then you can have interaction on the episodes where you can ask us random stuff during the episode, and we will sometimes cover it. Yeah. Um, I appreciate the folk Catholic perspective on this, And it's really funny that when I was a Kemetic, I did not realize that some Kemetics would threaten their gods as well. I didn't realize that at the time.
It's not all the thing all the time. There is
No.
some historical stuff of just like when you get mad and you say, if you don't do this thing for me, I will not do these offerings for you.
Mm-hmm.
Type of stuff. There's some historical credence to that. And again, that depends on your relationship with specific gods. And there's still levels of formality in Kemeticism, I think, that is not always in other areas of paganism. So that is something to take into account.
Context matters.
Context does matter.
For my part, I understand that the Nordic and Icelandic gods as more familial, and maybe it was the ways in which I was approaching Anpu and Bast when I first started practicing as a Kemetic. I found that relationship being very ceremonial, very formal, at least to start with, and then over time, you know, different aspects of it came forward, which were much less formal. But I find that at least where the Nordic and Icelandic heathen gods are concerned, and you can speak to the Goths on this one, would tend to be more conversational in terms of like the push and the pull of different things they want to have happen. When I do get something from Othin, it's usually my experience of Othin is like the older father who's like, "Hey, son, I really want you to do this thing," or I have a job for you, depending on the context of what somebody in the community needs or what the situation is. It's all context dependent. But a lot of times my experience with the Nordic and Icelandic gods is that it's very familial in terms of how requests are submitted. If that makes sense.
Please fill in the designated form and have it on my desk if you wish for this request to be seen.
Now, to be fair, you are an Odinson, so I
Right.
would expect a familial thing. For me, my familial ties feel more along the Kemetic lines. However, I do think there is a formality in Kemeticism that I don't fully see in heathenry. And I think that's like a different subcultural context and how things were approached and like state religion stuff historically. But yes, there is a more get down and dirty, I feel like, with the heathen gods. Not having to necessarily like clean yourself off first before coming to dinner.
What's your feel on this, Snow?
I was thinking, and I can't think that I have said no to a god or had cause or reason to. I have definitely had gods say no to me, which is a very humbling experience and is generally either a matter of I'm not the right person for the job, no matter how much I cry and whine about it. And so they say no, and I go, okay, fair. Or it's a matter of trying to rush into things I'm not ready for. And so being told to slow down and take my time, or I need to go learn something else first, or so on. Which I think was a big part of how I got led to astrology in the first place. But I mean, you mentioned Cabra, who I'm sure would be loving this conversation were they here. It's a shame they're not. And how Cabra talks about burying saint statues upside down until their will is granted. And Emily, you mentioned sort of Greco-Egyptian occultists and mystics and magicians sort of threatening the gods during magical rites for one thing or another to try and have their will be done. I'm very much at the kind of opposite end of that spectrum. And so those kinds of ideas just wouldn't occur to me as something to do. And I think if I were to try and do them, it would just feel very wrong because that's just not how I'm sort of philosophically, theologically wired. And so for me in my relationships with the gods, it is much more a matter of they're seeing things on scales that I don't and can't. And so if they're saying this way, that way, yes, no, then I'm either going, okay, let me bear that in mind and we'll see how this plays out. Or I'm going, okay, I'll accept that and trust in what you're saying. Which is why earlier I was saying that for me, I very much agree that with spirits and ancestors, it is a different thing where there is a lot more variety there. And so in those instances, I have said, yes, no, come in, get out, and so on, because there is a much greater degree of variation there, I find. But I mean, that's me coming at this from a very different angle, which I see a degree of in our pagan and polytheistic communities, but I don't necessarily think it's a majority thing. I don't necessarily think anyone else is wrong or anything else. It's just a different perspective.
I would say that I am also not really one that threatens the gods. I will say I've had like gods offer things where saying yes or saying no wasn't really a big deal either way. It was just something that it was up to, not necessarily that it wasn't a big deal, but it was up to me. But they were okay with either answer. And I had this happen with a god spouse thing way back when, and I had a friend talk to me about it, and I realized that I could say no. And before that, I was thinking that like, oh, this is something that the god wants me to do, and no, the god was just saying this was a possible option if I was interested. And that got me thinking about it and realizing that no, that was not the best relationship for me that I wanted with a specific deity. And then later on, when the offer came up from another god, I was initially like, no. But the kind of work that they were offering to do with me and the other spirits that were encouraging me to do this work, for me, the god spouse aspect was a needed part in order to do that work. So I ended up initially saying no, but coming around to saying yes. But for me, I think the no's have tended to happen if I do not have enough time or energy or resources. And so me saying no is not necessarily, sometimes it's a bigger thing. Sometimes it's just like they were just going down the list and I was the next person on the list. And I'm like, I don't think I'd be the best person to do this, or I don't have the time right now. So they'll just go on to the next person. And it's not like that big of a deal. They just needed an honest answer. And I think for me, that's usually when the no's come in, is not when it's, as far as the gods are concerned. It's not usually like, it's not like a relationship breaking thing. But it is like either path is equal. It's just different, and it's me deciding which way I want to go and which way I'm best able to go. Sarenth, do you have any thing to add?
I think the impact of the philosophy behind how you construct your relationship with the gods matters a great deal here, because I think of Snow, how your platonic mindset is the backdrop for how you understand the gods, and I don't hold it. And how different how you talk about the gods sounds coming out of my mouth versus yours. And I appreciate and enjoy it, but it does make a material impact on um if the ground of your philosophy is that the gods are capital G good, that they are the source of goodness, that is a huge impact on whether or not you're going to trust what you experience, or you're more likely to trust what you experience, versus myself, where sometimes the gods are adversarial, and that doesn't take them out of the really quick side tangent, that does not necessarily take them out of the capital G good category. But
Right.
I hope you understand what I'm driving at.
No, I do, yeah.
Okay, good. um because I don't have that backdrop of the gods being capital G good, and that I see
Mhm.
them as cosmologically significant, I see the category of God as a functional category.
Right.
Um Not one that implies virtue or implies morality. I'm literally looking at it like a functional label.
Right.
And I don't know if you understand it different than my own, but this is what I've grokked from talking with you, and you being on these episodes. Why you say no may differ a great deal as a result, based on philosophically how you understand the gods. This is kind of going back to what we were talking about with Claire, for for folks who aren't like ass over tea kettle in esoteric work. This is also a pretty big through line for why yeses and nos might come up, and in what
Right.
context.
Yeah, no, I'd say that sort of fairly sort of briefly and succinctly sums up the kind of difference between the two views that we've got in this conversation here. But I think there are definite commonalities about sort of considering your own energy levels, considering your own time, considering your own resources, considering your own welfare and well-being, considering how much you can actually focus on the task at hand or the task that you're being asked to undertake, how much you can dedicate of your own time and energy, sort of how long you can sustain that for, how regularly you could sort of do that sincerely. I think those are kind of the things that we would all agree on, sort of regardless of kind of the sort of backdrop, bigger picture theological perspectives that we're coming at this from. And I think that's maybe kind of the main thing we would want listeners to take away from this.
Yeah, definitely. It's worth pointing out, but it so much of what we've talked about is communicable across philosophical and esoteric mindset, that um whether you have a functional model, a virtue model, or a psychological model, I think a lot of what we've talked about still carries over. Um, I also really appreciate that we can come at the same question from such divergent philosophical viewpoints as polytheists and animists, and still more or less come away with, yeah, no, this all tracks. It's mutually intelligible.
Yes, we're speaking different languages, but I understand you.
It's all sort of German related. It's all good,
Yeah.
right?
Well, I mean, that's the plurality and multiplicity and many truths of a polytheistic community, a polytheistic worldview.
Mhm.
We don't all have to be honoring the same gods in the same ways for the same reasons for it to be just as valid or worthy of recognition. Sort of, I mean, if you look at sort of historically at the sort of Greek or Roman or Egyptian kind of civilizations, a lot of them going around was just them looking at other people and going, oh, that's how you worship your gods. All right. Because the
Right.
assumption was you would be doing some kind of ancestor veneration and you would be giving some kind of worship to some kind of gods. Details more than that were kind of irrelevant because they have other things to focus on, like economics and work and conquest.
Yeah, it's funny how the Greeks and the Romans have that in common of, we'll take in the cultists of whomever we might be trying to conquer that particular moment. And sometimes we bring their gods back with the cultists intact, and a lot of times we don't, because, you know, interpretation of Romana was a thing. And I know that's a whole complex topic, and it's far too easily flattened into a strict interpretation or, only one thing. But it's also kind of in terms of I really appreciate that we can talk across such differences in practice and opinion, and we're still more or less like in the same boat, charting roughly in the same waters, even if our destinations aren't quite the same port. I appreciate that. I appreciate that. Despite how very different and divergent our community is at around Grandfather Fire, um, that questions like these on yes and no and discernment still tracks regardless of whether we're talking about, say, the Christian witches in our midst, or the spirit worker polytheists, or the strictly exoteric animists. I appreciate that there's more than enough for us to hold in common, that even if I may not be able to speak directly to your experience, I can at least say, hey, this is my interpretation and understanding, and you can still get something out of it. So I really appreciate being able to explore these ideas and topics, because it really deepens my own practice as we ponder them and think on why we do what we do and how.
And I think those are the questions that really help people progress and get further, especially for those who want to. I mean, you get people who are very happy in sort of quote unquote beginner practices, quote unquote beginner stages. And then you get the people who want something deeper, want something further. And I think those questions of how and why are really how you get there.
Go ahead, Emily. Sorry.
No, you're good. I was just gonna echo Snow and say that like one way is not better than the other. But if you are looking to progress in a certain way, asking yourselves the how and the why. And I also think that helps with figuring out if you're feeling that something is off or if you're feeling a pull in a certain direction. Asking yourself those how and why questions might help with both the discernment and just realizing more where that's coming from and how that might benefit you. Are we ready to wrap up?
I was just thinking that if no one has final thoughts, we're about there.
Mhm. I think if I was to wrap up my feelings on the matter, I think that saying no to the gods is always a tool that should be in your tool chest, and likewise to the ancestors and the spirits. Uh, Saying no may not be, the hammer and every nail, but it's a tool in the tool chest just as much as yes is. And deciding what is appropriate is a very personal thing, but it also can be a very communal thing, both in terms of how you decide and who it affects. Um, so don't
And
be
when you
afraid. Yeah, go ahead.
when you were talking about how diverse the Around Grandfather Fire community is, and how these kinds of through points in conversations like these can apply to the Christian witches and the Christo-pagans and the animists and the heathens and the Comedicists and the druids and the Wiccans and so on that we have in the Around Grandfather Fire community. I'm kind of reminded of my favorite piece of Mongolian Empire trivia, which was that so long as you paid your tribute when they came knocking, they didn't care what religion you were involved with. It really didn't matter. And I think in that way we're like the benevolent Mongolian Empire, just without salting the earth and with fewer horses and less facial hair.
I mean, you've got the horse cultist covered. It's good.
We
That's
need
true.
more horses, I feel
We
like.
do. I agree. And so for those who would like to be more involved with the benevolent Mongolian Empire over here, patreon.com/aroundgrandfatherfire. Or come over and join our Discord server. You don't have to be on the Patreon to join our Discord server. There are all kinds of people there who know about all different kinds of things. And we're all learning from each other and different viewpoints. And Sarenth, I think you have a blog and a Patreon of your own.
I do. It is patreon.com/Sarenth Odinson. And WordPress, my WordPress is sarenth.wordpress.com. You can find me on most social media platforms as Sarenth. I'm on Twitter, Blue Sky. I'm on all Mastodon. I'm on a bunch of stuff. So if you're looking to get a hold of me, sarenth@gmail.com. If you have suggestions for guests or topics, please put it through the Discord under the I believe it's the questions or something similar. The Discord, because I had this in my
Topic
head.
suggestions, we normally say.
There we go. Topic suggestions. Throw it through the Discord or throw it through emails. If another social media platform works better for you, throw it in DMs. All right. So,
And Emily, I believe you have a blog yourself.
Yes, a very occasionally updated blog at streakingfate.wordpress.com.
and Snow.
And you can find me at linktree/snowthegoth. I'm Snow the Goth on any social media I happen to be on. And from my link tree, you will find my devotional music and my blog and everything else. And you're always welcome to talk to us on our Discord. And as Saren said, if you can't get to our Discord or can't find the Around Grandfather site with the question form box thing, you're always welcome to message us with suggestions, questions, etc.
Oh, really quick, because I forgot to mention this last episode. Anchor.fm does allow you to send in audio files that we can play on the air if you wish to actually be part of the episode, but you can't show up. Before we break, I also wanted to plug Cabras, which is the Steel City Witch on YouTube. Seriously, check their stuff out. It's amazing. And I love their exploration of all topics witchy and occult.
And I believe Cabra's blog is steelcitywitch.wordpress.com.
Yep.
And if not, I'm certain they have a link to it from their YouTube. So Steel City Witch on YouTube.
All right, folks. If we don't have anything else, I want to thank all of you for joining us, and we will see you next time around the fire.